How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Ed O'Malley. I believe, and I said that name right. He is the founder of VeloVeta, which is an aerodynamic, easy to slip on triathlon shoe. We'll make sure to link their stuff in the show notes below. But first 30 minutes, we just talk about who Andy is. He's a mechanical engineer. He's got a lot of crazy experience from working in Aerospace and Aeronautics to working on hydrogen-based engines, which have really high compression ratios. If you know anything about gas versus diesel, you know diesel takes a lot more compression. Hydrogen takes like 10 times more than that to light efficiently. So anyway, without further ado, wanted to introduce you to Ed O'Malley. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Super awesome to have you here. I was actually just watching some of your videos online, and I was getting all giddy watching the. I guess it's from about 4 years ago with the machine that was actually like pressing the shoe mold or whatever around, and I guess attaching the leather to the sole or something like that.
Yeah, the lasting machine. They're pretty incredible little machines. Big machines, actually.
Yeah, it seems. Is it all pneumatic driven?
It is pneumatic, yeah.
Okay, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Without getting too far into it, we'll get into it later too. But the reason it excites me so much is in college I started a company called Sway. We made it's a textile product, but insulated camping hammocks. So I got to go to Asia and work on the lines and try to make stuff. And I'm not an
Yeah.
engineer by any means, but working with the small parts and just thinking through how to make something into a reality is like such a cool thing. So I'm super excited to have you on.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. The innovation that goes into the actual manufacturing processes of things is pretty incredible, and almost nobody gets to see it. So,
Yeah. Yeah, super neat. Cool. Well, we'll get into it. But the first question that I kind of want to start out with is a little bit of a third person question, and that is, who is Ed?
oh God, do I even know the answer to that question? Um, yeah. I don't know. I guess I am a person that is thrilled by both maybe three things, like technical challenges. I love solving technical challenges.
Yeah.
I learned when I was in college that well, no, I learned before that. I learned in summer camp that I was really motivated by physical endurance challenges.
Okay.
Um, and then throw a little bit of adventure in with either of those two things, and like I'm in my happy place. So
Yeah.
I guess that's who I am.
Yeah. Good deal. So where are you from?
I was born in New York City, but I moved to San Antonio, Texas when I was 1 year old. So I
Okay.
grew up there, went to high school there.
Okay. Good deal. You have any siblings?
I have one fraternal twin brother who lives in Austin, Texas.
Okay. Good deal. Are you guys pretty close?
Yeah, I'll give a plug for him. He's known as Dr. Nerdlove,
Okay.
and he's sort of an online, well, more than online, dating advice and columnist and YouTuber. So
Okay. Good deal. Are you guys pretty close?
yeah. I mean, as close as we can be for not, living anywhere close to each other. So we see each other at holidays and
Sure.
stuff like that. I'll see him next week for Thanksgiving.
Okay. Good deal. Where are you guys all meeting at?
We're gonna go all meet in Marfa, Texas, actually, which is way out in West Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So where do you live right now? You said.
Boulder, Colorado.
Okay. You do live in Boulder.
Yeah.
What's it like living in Boulder, and how long have you lived there?
So my wife and I moved there from New York City in 2014,
Okay.
and our goal was to live in a smaller town near the mountains where we can easily access, fun stuff in the outdoors and in the mountains and still be near a big airport for work and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I've loved the community that I've become a part of there.
Sure.
I think that we share a lot of the same passions, and so that's been really great. The ease at which I can go out my back door and be hiking in the mountains is fantastic. I
Hmm.
wish skiing was a little bit closer. People think, oh, you live in Colorado, you must be really close to skiing, but really the closest good skiing, if there's no traffic, is at least really 90 minutes away, and there's always traffic. So it's
Yeah.
it's more than that.
Yeah.
But we love skiing. It's been really good.
How did you meet your wife?
Uh, Online dating in New York City.
Okay, nice. Did you
Yeah.
go to New York kind of after college for work? I would assume.
Oh, it was way after college.
Oh, really?
So I moved there. I graduated from college in 1999,
Okay.
and I moved to New York in 2009.
Okay. What kind of work were you doing before VeloVeta?
At the time that I moved out there, I was, and this is, it's still going, although it's been on hold for a bit. It's a spin out company from Caterpillar, working on a highly compact, highly efficient hydrogen powered engine.
That sounds like really complicated but really interesting.
It is both of those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So, was it hard leaving that to go do your own thing? I mean, I'm sure there's a mixed feeling, or was there not?
Uh, well, no. The reason I really started thinking about shoes, or maybe the reason I had time to start thinking about shoes, is that that company was kind of in a holding pattern, looking for funding
Sure.
after the end of our previous um, prototyping and testing effort, and
Hmm.
so I found myself with extra time on my hands, which means I started thinking about things and got excited about the shoe idea. So
Yeah, for sure. So I'd like to go back a little bit more to the younger version of you. Just from us now interacting, I guess, for like 6 or 7 minutes, you seem like you have the mind of an engineer. You like to make sure that you understand and you get that stuff down. With becoming that person over time, was that something that you kind of grew into in terms of just tinkering and things, or is it more nature, nurture? What do you think?
uh, I mean, I think it's mostly nature, in that most of my family are not really technical type people or engineering type people, but it was always something that I was interested in. I think that the time I really first got really interested in it when I was, how old was I? Like fifth or sixth grade or something, and I went to space camp.
Oh yeah,
Um,
okay,
and I was just really fascinated with the technical details about the stuff that, like, when you're a little kid at space camp,
yeah,
they don't teach you much about the details, but like, you go to the store and there's the little book that you can buy that has all of the space shuttle launch procedures listed out, and like the diagram of the cockpit and what all the switches do. So little fifth grade Ed like bought this book, and then I would go home and try as hard as I could to like understand everything that was in it. And I think that was sort of the beginning for me. And then I remember still maybe in sixth or seventh grade making my mom take me to I think it was the library for UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio,
okay.
to go check out a book on aerodynamics so I could design my own model airplane. And
Oh, that's
so,
right.
I'm sitting there trying to decipher. I didn't even know what calculus was, and I'm looking at all these uh, formulas with integrals and stuff in them, trying to figure out how to design a wing. And of course, I never, like, I was able to understand the basic idea, but I definitely wasn't able to do the math yet at that point in
Yeah.
my life. But that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, for sure. So then going into like, I guess you were grade school, middle school at that point, you're going into high school, you start to, I would assume, find more interest in the fine-tuned details. Was math super easy for you in high school? And did you just decide at that point, engineering going that route?
Yeah, yeah. I think, as I got to high school, I was able to define my goals a lot better, and I knew I wanted to become a mechanical engineer, and I knew I wanted to be involved in aerospace or space or that kind of thing. And in high school, I was able to slide through all that stuff super easily. Um, when I got to college, I tried to continue sliding through without doing any sort of
Sure.
work, and that didn't work out too well for me. So I
Yeah.
had to learn. I had to learn after I got to college how to be a good student. I was kind of forced into that, and eventually I figured that part out too.
Yeah.
Um, and starting, what was it? I guess sophomore year was when I started getting my first like real jobs working on spacecraft and that kind of thing. I started working on a spacecraft that the department, the physics department was working on, and so I that's kind of how my engineering career got started.
Yeah. So what college did you go to, you said?
To Johns Hopkins.
Johns Hopkins. Okay, so that doesn't sound like a super easy school to get into, but I'm not sure. Is that true? False?
Yeah, that's true. I think the year my freshman year there, we were ranked seventh in the country, something like that. And
Yeah.
I don't know what acceptance rates were or whatever, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I skated through on some technicality. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Was it a stressful situation for you trying to get into that school or
Um, I don't remember being stressed about it. I think I actually didn't expect to get in, and I thought that
really?
I was going to go somewhere else. And then when I did get in, I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go there.
Yeah.
Um, it, so I didn't stress about it because I just assumed I wasn't going to get in.
Yeah. Is that how you typically approach life? It sounds like a healthy way to approach life because I usually end up getting disappointed.
Yeah, for most of my life, I was the kind of person that really never got much stress from anything. I've always been pretty relaxed about stuff. I feel like since launching VeloVeta, I am constantly stressed about everything, and think I think that that's because it's like 100% like my baby. There's no one else involved in it. There's no one else to blame. Like anything that happens to it is like it feels
It's you.
really personal,
Yeah.
and I know other people, if somebody else is like, this shoe doesn't fit, like, I'm going to return it. Like they don't think they're making like a personal attack on me. Like it's a shoe that doesn't fit. This happens
Yeah.
to everybody every day. But for me, I'm like, oh my God, the shoe didn't fit.
What did I do
What did
wrong?
I do wrong?
Yeah.
How can I make this better? Like I stress out about everything now, which is a very unusual sensation for me that I'm trying to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. So how old are you now, if I may ask?
I'm 46.
Okay, so you're 46 and you started this company 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
So I started working on it in 2018.
Okay.
Um, and then the shoe actually launched at the very end of May of this year.
Okay, good deal. So we're going to come back to that, but I want to dig just a little bit deeper before VeloVeta. So you're at college, you're working at Johns
Yep,
Hopkins,
yep,
aerospace, aeronautics,
yep,
engineering. That's your focus.
yep.
What happened in between there? Then I guess you ended up at CAT working on the hydrogen engines, and
Yeah,
what's the
so
yeah.
so I went through, at first I worked on that satellite when I was a sophomore called Fuse. Everything's acronyms and NASA and stuff. Far
Yeah.
ultraviolet spectroscopic explorer, and then I worked on another spacecraft for the Applied Physics Lab in Laurel, Maryland. And then after I graduated, I worked first. I started working for this company called Futron, which was a defense and NASA contractor. And my first job there was working on space shuttle scheduling and launch risk quantification, and I
Good
did that
grief.
only for a little bit of time, and then I went to work on the International Space Station, modeling the risk of all sorts of bad stuff happening. So like, what's the probability of an astronaut dying? What's the probability of the space station losing pressurization? What's the like we had three or four like catastrophic end states, and like coming up with a way to mathematically predict the likelihood of those things
Yeah.
happening, and then what to do to make it better.
Yeah. And you didn't get stressed over any of that stuff?
It didn't. No, I didn't feel any stress about that. Um, sometimes there would be things that like went wrong in orbit, and they would ask us, "Hey, we have an oxygen leak somewhere. This is how we're detecting it. This is how we know what it is. Um, where do you think that, what do you think the failure is?" Because we have this model where we would say, "Okay, this is what's happening," and it would pop up like an ordered list of the most likely reasons that's happening. So we could
Interesting.
really rapidly help like narrow down where the problem might be.
Yeah.
And so even when that stuff was happening, stress didn't, no, I never felt any stress about it.
Okay. That's a gift. I mean, I think we should probably have you write a book, How Not to Be Stressed in Stressful Situations. It would probably sell really well.
I don't think I wouldn't know what to say. It's just how I was, and now I feel like I'm not that person anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll get into that for sure. So Aeronautics, you were working with Futron. After Futron, is this when you started moving to CAT?
No, well, not quite. So I decided I wanted to get into entrepreneurship and
Okay.
um, and sort of do my own thing, create my own thing. So I went to business school at
Okay.
Babson in Wellesley, which is a business school that focuses on entrepreneurship.
Yeah,
And then
it's a
from
pretty big one, I
there,
think.
I co-founded a company with some folks out in Nevada that manufactured auxiliary power units for long haul trucks. And so basically, what we made was, long haul truckers. They do it less and less now, but at the time, um, basically every long haul trucker would pull off at the truck stop at the side of the road and
Hmm.
leave their big, 16-liter engine idling all night long so that they could have heating and air
Uh,
conditioning or
right.
and electricity. And it's a really inefficient way to do that. So we would make a very small diesel generator with a built-in air conditioning and heating system, and it would integrate into the truck and the engine and the cabin, whatever, and provide them even better services than they would normally get, but use a small fraction of the fuel. So I founded a company out in Reno, Nevada that did that. Um,
Did it go
how
well?
long? It was in some ways it went well, in some ways it went disastrously bad. Um, the product was great. Our customers loved the product. Uh, the problems were personality related within the
Sure.
company. Um, and there were four co-founders. Um, two of my co-founders got pushed out really quickly. I decided that I wanted to stick it out and I could sort of handle all the stuff that was going on. And I did that for a few more years. And after a while, I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I bailed, and the company was sold shortly after that.
Okay. Were you able to make some money off of that acquisition?
Uh, it wasn't a super good acquisition. This is gonna it's gonna sound like I'm tooting my own horn, and
Toot it.
I
I'm
think
ready
I
for
think
it.
that I think that I believe it's accurate. So my job was not really sales. I was head of engineering. I did a lot of business development stuff for the company,
Sure.
but I also knew the product better than anybody else, and I knew
Mhm.
our competitors' products better than anybody else. And so what that meant was if we had a fleet customer that really needed to understand a lot about how this was going to integrate with their business, I was the one that talked to them about it.
Yeah.
And so when I left, fleet sales went down to like almost zero.
Wow.
Um,
And that
and
seems like what would
so,
make the most money.
yep, yep. And so, so things, the company was sold, but it could have been a lot better than it was.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the end of that journey. What happened next?
So, what happened pretty much immediately after that? Let me throw this watch away. It's beeping at me.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, was so one of the investors in that company had been the first president of something called the Kauffman Foundation, which is a venture capital related foundation that does a lot of stuff. Well, I think the thing it's most known for is the Kauffman Fellows Program, which places business school students in positions with venture capital firms to develop them as potential new future VC investors.
Yep.
And anyway, so he had been hired by Kansas State University to help them figure out how to commercialize their portfolio of patents and technology that they own. And
Okay.
one of the things that they owned had been donated to them from Caterpillar.
Oh, interesting.
Um, so Caterpillar had gotten a DARPA grant. DARPA is the Defense Advanced
Case
Research Projects Agency.
guys that make the
Um,
robots.
yeah, all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So Caterpillar had gotten a grant from DARPA to develop this very unusual engine that at the time they understood it to be very, very compact and small. Um, I don't think that they really had much of an understanding of its ability to be very, very efficient yet. They didn't really have a great understanding yet of its ability to use almost any kind of fuel you could imagine.
Them
And so
being
they
CAT
did
or them being the organization, the foundation.
either.
Okay.
Um, and so they did some studies on it. They did some design work on it. They didn't get too far. The grant ended, and Caterpillar ended up donating the technology to Kansas State University because they could get a huge tax break for it. I think they got a $25 million tax break.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. Yeah. Wow.
they originally asked for 50 million. That ended up going down to 25 million, and then there were Senate hearings about it, and the law that allowed that to happen got rescinded. So you can't do
Tough
that. You
times.
can't do it
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
You can't do it anymore, partially because of this donation. But anyway, um, my investor from the previous company got in touch with me and said, "Hey, Kansas State University has this technology. Do you think it's something you could do something with?" And I went out and met with the folks from Kansas State, and then I got the guy who had invented it at Caterpillar. Um, so I went out and spent a weekend with him at his place, talking about the engine. And I was not really an expert in engines and thermodynamics at the time. I had done a startup related to engines, but built, including an engine into a product is not the same as designing an engine from
Sure.
scratch. Um, so I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I knew that this guy was the real deal and that he was brilliant, and that I trusted him. And I
Yeah.
got him to agree that if we did a deal with Kansas State University, he would come on and be our chief scientist.
Oh, sweet.
And so I did it. And the great thing about the technology is it turned out to be a lot more capable than we believed. We raised money. We went through a couple different prototype development and testing phases.
Hmm.
Um, and the first one actually went terribly.
Okay.
The design was really, really unique, and it used a lot of things in unusual ways. And ultimately, what happened is all the things that were supposed to seal didn't seal. There was like air leaking everywhere.
Okay.
And so we redesigned it to have the same basic characteristics, but to be in sort of a more conventional configuration. And then we built
Live
that one.
everyday engine type of situation.
Yeah, so like to use normal poppet valves like we have lots of experience with in engines, and to use piston rings that, are seeing forces primarily in one direction rather than lots of weird directions, and
Yeah.
to get those to seal better. But to
Gotcha.
keep the same novel new thermodynamic cycle and the same novel new geometries. And so we were able to do that, and that engine worked a lot better. It worked really well.
Okay.
Given the budget that we had, the fact that we were able to design, build, and test an engine with the results that we had in that amount of time with that amount of money was really remarkable. However, the industry in general, like this technology still represented a lot of changes to the status quo. And for a lot of for complicated devices, a lot of times people, if you change one thing, try to improve one thing, that seems like a lot of technical
Yeah.
risk to make it better. If you're completely changing around like 10 things, people look at it and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's
How do
terrifying.
I deal with it? Yeah.
Really terrifying. Like, do I want to take on that much risk? And while our second prototype, it worked really well, it wasn't like all the way there. We weren't like ready for a commercial product yet.
Yeah.
So, and this industry is really, really conservative, much more so than most others. And they've been doing it for 100 years and making a
That's why.
ton of
Yeah.
money doing what they've been doing for 100 years. And so if you go and say, hey, you got to change everything you're doing,
Tough luck.
it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And so finding an investor to keep that thing going has been difficult. But
So it's still going on.
it still exists. It's still going on. We're still doing work on it, but it's at a much lower level than it had been.
Can I ask it may not be a very technical question, but I kind of want to understand. So you said it's hydrogen based. So is this a combustion engine?
Yeah.
Like, what is the difference between like gas and diesel? Because I know there's different temperatures involved and pressures with diesel versus gas, but how does hydrogen work to create a more efficient engine using more conventional design means?
Yeah. So the hydrogen has a few challenges to it, to use it in an internal combustion engine. And a lot of people thought it really couldn't happen for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things that's bad about hydrogen is once it lights off, it burns very, very, very rapidly. And so that does two things. It puts a lot of stress on the components of the engine, and it creates a lot of what are called nitric oxide emissions. And nitric oxide emissions can be controlled with catalysts, but the more you make, the more catalyst you need, and all that kind of stuff. So controlling the combustion of hydrogen has always been really difficult. Lighting hydrogen off with a spark is easy, like in a gasoline engine. Gasoline engines use spark for ignition. Diesel engines don't. You just compress it enough, and just the compression creates enough heat to light off the diesel fuel. And so our engine is a compression ignition engine. And one of the things that it can do that a conventional engine can't is go to really, really high compression ratios. Like a normal gasoline engine might be 12-1. A normal diesel engine might be 18-1. Our last prototype was 56-1.
Oh my word.
And one of the things that's good about that is not all fuels will light off really quickly with the compression ratio of like a diesel engine. So if you tried to put in natural gas in a regular diesel engine and light it off with compression, it's probably not going to work really well, because the delay for natural gas between the time it reaches the temperature that it will eventually light off at and the time that it actually lights off is so long that the engine has gone all the way around again before anything happens, and so it doesn't work. And hydrogen is the same way. It has a really long ignition delay, unless you can compress it even farther. And the more you compress it, the shorter that delay gets. And so with the 56-1 compression ratio, it's like instant.
Yeah.
And so, that allows us to, and compression ignition is generally a more efficient way of burning fuels than spark ignition. It has a lot of advantages for a lot of different reasons. When you're dealing with a new fuel that might be expensive, or might be hard to get, or is just, in its earliest stages, green hydrogen is finally becoming a real thing. No one ever thought that was going to be a real thing, but green hydrogen is finally becoming a real thing. It's still really new. Efficiency is really important. You're not making greenhouse gases with it, so you don't need to worry about efficiency for that, but you do need to worry about efficiency for the cost of operating the engine and that kind of thing, and conserving a scarce fuel. So we can burn hydrogen much, much more efficiently than you can in a spark ignited engine, and then we can also do some really creative things with how the fuel is introduced, when the fuel is introduced, to slow down the rate at which it's burning, which keeps the temperatures from getting too high, which keeps it from making too much nitric oxide emissions. So we can have a really compact, high efficiency, zero carbon dioxide engine with manageable NOx emissions.
Yeah. Man, that's super fascinating. So in terms of your time allocated, what is that versus like what you're doing with VeloVeta right now?
Right now, that company is called Motive Engines. It's almost zero time on that right now,
Okay.
and basically 100% time on VeloVeta.
Okay, good deal. Well, let's dive into that. So, when did the idea come? I know a little bit, but for the sake of the audience, would love to hear just when you first thought of the idea, when you started cutting up, making prototypes, all the way to, all right, I'm going to Italy. Now we have our first production run, and now I have more stress than I've ever known how to deal with.
Yeah. Um, so it started in 2018 when I noticed a lot of people discussing, mostly on Slow Twitch, about like what cycling shoes happen to be more aerodynamic than other cycling shoes, and still useful for triathlon. And people were spending a lot of money buying lots of pairs of shoes and flying out to a wind tunnel, either in North Carolina or in San Diego or wherever, and testing all these shoes to figure out which ones they wanted to use. And I was like, wow, like people are motivated for it. Like this is a product that at least some people really want, a
Yeah,
shoe that is both aerodynamic and good in transition and all that stuff.
yeah,
And, people were, uh, um, uh, buying shoes and cutting them apart and changing them to try to make them into something that would work.
yeah.
And so that's what got me to do the idea. And so I started messing around with designs on my computer and messing around with computational fluid dynamics simulations of those designs to see
What does that actually
if
mean for those of us who don't know?
so computational fluid dynamics is basically a simulated wind tunnel in your computer. And
Okay.
so you do a 3D model of whatever it is you want to test, and then you run this simulation that calculates what the air is going to do around it, and you can figure out what
Squeeze.
happens. Like, where is the pressure, where is the turbulence, how's all that happening? Um, and I hadn't done a lot of CFD stuff in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of learning for me, and I spent probably a bunch of months doing a bunch of simulations that ended up being completely worthless as I was learning
How to use the
how to
software.
do it in a way to get good results. Because
Okay.
it's really easy to like just plug in a model and plug in some assumptions and have it run and give you pretty pictures that look great.
Yeah.
But like, does the data actually convert at all to real life?
Yeah.
Um, and at first, the answer was no, almost all the time,
Really.
until I started getting better at it. Because I would look at the results, and often with aerodynamics, the results are unintuitive, but I was getting like really weird results. And so that would cause me to go read more and be like, oh, I did this wrong. And then I would get more weird results and I would go read more. I'm like, oh, I'm also doing this wrong. Oh, I also need to buy a computer that's 20 times more powerful than what I already have.
Yeah.
Stuff
To
like that.
process all those
So
calculations.
yeah, because it got to the point where I like, okay, now I think I have a model that is gonna work, and I would try to run it on my laptop, and I would leave it running for 12 days, and it would still be running.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I need to get something better.
Yeah. Is it fair to, I don't know if that's even the right way to say it, but is it accurate to say that with a fixed three-dimensional model of what something would be in the real world, you can put that through one of these CFDs, if that's what it's called, a CFD, and
Mhm.
it give you like, if you have the correct assumptions and the right processing power, it'll give you like a one for one equal output of data that you would get in an actual wind tunnel. I know people are different because we're all shaped differently, so that's why they use those. But
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much computing power you want to put behind it and what kind of model you want to make. It will give you an estimation, and how close can you get to reality is the question. And the
yeah,
more, there are different ways to model it, and some are sort of like averages over time, and some are more about like what's happening real time, second by second. And depending on exactly what information you're looking for, kind of dictates on what kind of model you want to choose and
Sure.
how much computing power it takes to execute that simulation. And so, the simulations that we did were what are called Reynolds average. Well, anyway, it averages the drag and results over time because
Okay.
it takes less computing power to do it. It's good enough. Like what's my average drag over 10 seconds or however long the simulation goes,
Sure.
is good enough. And it's not real life. The conditions are idealized.
Like
You don't have it.
humidity, temperature, all that.
Well, yeah, you can change that in the model, but like the wind is all, the wind that it's seeing is perfectly constant all the time. There's no
Yeah.
aberrations. It's not changing directions. The foot and the shoe is completely stable. You can do ones where it actually moves and pedals and stuff, but that's not what we did. Ours were we did
Yeah.
static simulations at different angles,
Yeah.
and so that ultimately leads to like there's only so much money you can put behind something like this. We're not developing a $2 billion bomber for the Air Force, that with like unlimited resources. So there's only, we can go as far as we can go. It's reasonable. And,
Yeah.
and so, um, so that's what we did. And the results were starting to look good and that you could make, if you made the right design choices, you could make a positive difference
Yeah.
between the two. And so I started cutting up shoes and gluing 3D printed pieces to them and trying to ride in them and asking friends to ride in them and see how that worked.
Yeah.
Um, and once all that started looking kind of good, I was like, okay, well, how do you make a shoe? Because I had no idea how a shoe is made. It's so different from anything else that I've ever made before.
Yeah.
So I knew I needed help. And so Pearl Izumi has an office not too far from Boulder. And I got a guy by the name of Philip Major, who had recently been the head of footwear for Pearl Izumi, to come on board and be a consultant, to basically teach me how shoes are made and
Yeah.
and help me reach out to factories and figure out how to get the thing made.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big step. So tell me what that was like. Because I mean, do you reach out to him or do you knock on someone's door at Pearl Jimmy? Hey, here's this shoe. I'd love to make it. Come help me. Or like, how did that happen?
I believe that I found him on LinkedIn. I was just like
Yeah.
searching
Smart.
LinkedIn profiles to find people who seem to have the right experience, and I was like, wow, this guy has great experience, and he's just down the street. So
Yeah.
so I reached out to him, and he was interested in helping out, and um, his experience at Pearl Izumi was manufacturing in Asia,
Yeah.
and so that's where we started out was looking at Asia, and it was a very turbulent time for manufacturing relationships between the U.S. and Asia. We were starting this whole trade war thing,
Yeah. Yeah. Tough
and
times.
yeah, and most U.S. manufacturers were fleeing China and trying to go to
Get somewhere
Vietnam.
safe. Mm-hmm.
So Vietnam was rapidly building up new shoe factories, but they didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of experience, and so
Yeah.
we approached a couple factories in China, and I want to say that like the first one we got a quote from it wasn't even really a quote. It was, yeah, we could make this shoe for you. Your minimum order quantity will be 2 million pairs.
Basically, we're not interested.
Yeah, it was a way to say, go away.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
gonna work with you.
Interesting.
It was just it was the most absurd. It's like, I need to sell a pair of shoes to every triathlete in the world. Um,
Or two. Yeah.
yeah, it was ridiculous. So, um, so that didn't work. You know, Philip didn't believe that the new factories in Vietnam had the expertise yet to do something as different as what we were trying to do.
Or even the logistics,
Um,
I feel like.
yeah, I mean the assembly process for our shoe ends up having to be different than a normal shoe, and the the grading of the last, because we have this thing that like really wraps around the whole shoe, and to try to make that thing fit all the different sizes without having to make a different mold for every single size. It requires a lot of sort of creative
Yeah.
ideas on how the shape of the shoe changes from size to size and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Um, and so we started looking in Europe instead.
Yeah. So I'll dive into that in a second. I want to talk a little bit about the design. When I first saw it and came across it, it reminded me, because I snowboard, it reminded me of these bindings called flow bindings. I think several companies are making them now. Have you heard of them?
I don't know flow bindings, no.
So flow binding is basically similar, only you're in a boot, obviously, but you stick your foot into the binding, and as you push your foot forward, the same similar kind of a mechanism. There's a cord that goes into the back, and as you snap up, it creates tension and
Okay.
pulls the tongue
Yeah.
forward. So when I saw it, I was like, oh, these are flow bindings, but like for triathlon shoes, and I was like, man, no one's done this yet. That's awesome. So
Yeah, it
how did
was
you come
actually
up with that
the
design?
a ski boot.
Okay.
The mechanics of the lever on the heel are
Hmm.
just like the buckles on the front of a ski boot.
Yeah.
It's called an over center mechanism.
Hmm.
And then, with the ski boot, you can lengthen them by twisting them. And ours works basically the same way by twisting a knob that has a screw that lengthens it. Um, and so it works basically exactly the same as a ski boot, but just shaped to integrate into the heel of a shoe. And so that's where the idea came from. And then one of the challenges was making that motion open the shoe enough.
So you could
Um,
put it on during a
so
race.
that yeah, so that you can put it on in a race. And so like I did a lot of iterations with, okay, if I put the pivot here and the wire is attached there and it goes in over here and I open it, like how many centimeters of distance does that give me? And like figuring out how to optimize that. Spent a lot of
Yeah.
time on that.
Yeah. How much time?
Oh God, I don't know.
Days, years?
Oh, not years. If I added it all up, you know, probably spent a week or two on
Yeah.
just kind of figuring out exactly where to put all those components to
Yeah.
get it to be as good as it could be.
Yeah. And then when you got it, was it an eureka moment? You're just holding this thing in the air, singing its praises. You're like, this is it. This is gonna be the one.
It was well, so it was tough to convince the guys in Italy. Maybe I'm jumping forward here, but they're like, this mechanism won't open enough. You need at least, I forget what number they said, but they're like, you need at least X centimeters for this to work. And I was
Yeah.
like, I can get that. And they're like, no, no, you can't. And so I went back and I was like doing it all, and then I sent them this sort of like report that has all the dimensions and how many centimeters, and they were kind of like, okay. I think they were still skeptical, but they were like, all
Yeah.
right, okay, I think we can do it.
How did you get the introduction, or was it an introduction? Was it cold call, email, something of the Italians?
So our initial trip was we went to go check out two different factories in Europe. One was in Spain and one was in Italy. And I can't remember how I got in touch with the guy in Spain. The one in Italy, um, Physique used to make their shoes at that factory in Italy.
Okay.
And so I got in touch with somebody who had been at Physique and asked. I didn't know what factory that they had been manufacturing in, but I knew they had been there. So I got in touch with somebody
Yeah.
from Physique, and they said, go talk to this factory in Treviso, and gave me an email address. And so that's how I got in touch with them.
Yeah. So when I got to go overseas for the first time for manufacturing, for me, I grew up watching things like How It's Made or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. They had a section where they showed the manufacturing process, and it just like blew my mind. It was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
When I went for the first time to China, I was like, I've made it. I mean, we had made no money really, but I was like, this is it. I've reached the pinnacle. That was the most exciting part for me. Do you share
Yeah.
that at all when you went for the first time to like go set up manufacturing? I guess you kind of already had
Well,
some interactions with
I
it.
had done manufacturing before. I set up a factory in the United States. I set up two factories in the United States for the diesel APU company, and then
Yeah.
I had been to factories in China because we considered doing
Hmm.
some manufacturing in China. So I'd seen those factories as well. So I had some manufacturing experience, but it was really different because all my manufacturing experience is cutting or bending metal stuff or
Yeah.
bolting stuff together,
Hmm.
not soft goods and organic shapes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think surprised me, and maybe it shouldn't have, but the number of different factories involved in putting a shoe together it's crazy how many different companies there are manufacturing stuff to go into one pair of shoes. So, the first factory I visited was just the main assembly factory, which is the video that you were referring to earlier,
Hmm.
where you have just the floppy upper of the shoe, and then you have the sole, and you have what the last. Lots of people in shoes or whatever talk about a last. I think a lot of people don't know exactly what it is. So the last of a shoe is basically just a piece of plastic that's in the shape of a foot that defines what the shape of the shoe is going to be.
Yeah.
And so, um, you take the upper that has been sewn together, and you kind of put that on the last, and you put the sole on the bottom, and you stick that in this machine, and it has all these fingers around it, like grab the soft material of the upper, stretch it over, applies glue to the bottom of the lasting. It's not the sole, it's the lasting board that goes on there.
Yeah.
Applies glue to the lasting board, and then like stretches and puts the upper onto it and holds it, and it dries and lets go. And all of a sudden, you've got something that's in the shape of a shoe. Um,
Yeah. It's
and
pretty amazing.
It's really great. Yeah. But before any of that happens, you have a company that cuts out all the soft material for the upper pieces. And there's lots of those different little pieces. It looks like it's
Hmm.
all one piece, but like there's a lot of different layers with a lot of different pieces. And so there's one company that basically all they do is have laser cutters that cut all that stuff up. And then all that gets sent to the stitchery. And then they stitch it all together, and they stitch the little attachment points onto it and stitch it into something that looks like an upper. And then you have the company that is molding the carbon fiber soles. And so they're doing compression molding of carbon fiber soles. And then you have the company that's doing the injection molding of the plastic parts. Then you have the company that is doing the final assembly. And then after that, actually, to get all the wires and stuff wired up together, there's another
By
company that
hand.
does that by hand. And then even before all that, you have other companies that design and make the molds that are used in the injection molding machines or that are used in the carbon fiber compression molding machines. Um, all of that just for one shoe.
Yeah. So, which
Um,
leads me to a couple of questions. First, now I understand why shoes are so expensive. Two, um, quality control seems like that would be very difficult because I think you named off at least 7 different steps or companies where you need to like almost be there to make sure somebody doesn't fudge something. Because when it gets 4 lanes down, then it's like, oh, now we have to recall these things. So how do you manage that?
yeah, so basically, I rely on the main factory that does like the final assembly and the lasting and that kind of stuff. And so honestly, like I've built up a really good relationship with him. I go there many times a year. I talk with the owner of that factory on a weekly basis, and basically I have to trust him that his process is gonna discover problems before they happen. On top of that, we visually inspect every shoe before it goes out.
Okay.
So you know, every time we get an order in, we get the box out, we open it up. We there's actually we actually right now we're this is a quality control issue that didn't get caught,
Yeah.
and I think it was really more of a communication issue. But the wires that came from the factory after we started mass production were a different spec from what had been tested in the prototypes, and they weren't good enough. And so um, one of the things we do now is every time we get an order, we swap those wires out for new ones. And then we look at the shoe and make sure that everything looks right, the mechanism is working right, everything is
Yeah.
printed right, uh, there's not cracks or something missing or whatever. And so that's our final check before it
Okay.
goes out the door.
Are you shipping by sea in container
The from yeah the
from Italy, port to port?
from the factory we had a container shipped over to Houston,
Yeah.
and then yeah.
So whenever the reason I asked this next question is because whenever I started making hammocks, I was like, oh, there's like 5 or 6 pieces. I think our bill of materials ended up being like over 100
Oh
lines.
yeah,
Like how big
yeah.
is your bill of materials? Because I'm sure it's massive.
Uh, I don't know the answer to that. There aren't that many parts in it. Most of the parts are in the upper,
Yeah.
and you can't see them. They're all hidden inside, basically. But if I were to guess the number of parts in a shoe, it's only going to be like 18, 19 parts, I think.
Okay. That's not as bad as I thought. But if do you, I guess let me ask this question. Whenever you came to the factory and you're like, hey, here's my model, you create a gold sample, do they basically take it and help source all the materials and all the plastics and the leathers and everything for you, or is that more of your job?
It depends on what kind of factory you're talking to. Like the
Okay.
factories in China are like you provide them basically a little book that
Yeah.
has all the details of
Hmm.
how to go about making this shoe. Um, and they will make exactly what you give them.
Yeah. Get your
But
stuff right.
right. But because I had no idea what I was doing, um, I didn't have the ability to get that together properly. And so I
Yeah.
needed a factory that was willing to like collaborate with me and help me and like walk me along. And so with with where we're making the shoes, that it was like, here's what my idea is, and here are my, you know, mechanical engineer's brain. Like this is how I have defined these parts, which is different from how the cycling shoe industry does it. You know, how do we work together to make this into something real? And he's like, okay, well, here's the next step you need to do, and here's the next step you need to do, and let's talk to this upper designer to see if he can do what you want. And so it
Yeah.
was really more of a collaborative process.
Sounds like a
Um,
good
the
process. Yeah.
the big shoe factories don't work that way.
Yeah.
You send them what's called the tech pack, and they make it, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's how it's cool that you found that. I wasn't sure if because again, just talking about my own experience because I'm kind of relating it. Whenever I did stuff like I was really blessed to have some people walk me through the process because I had no idea either. But it's good to
Yeah.
know that the Italians will do the same thing. So if I ever want to start something over in Italy, I might do that and contact these same people.
Yeah, it was great. China, when we were first talking to China, uh, one of the things I said, it was like, I want the upper to be like a one piece upper, which means like the outer shell of the upper is only one piece of material with like one seam up the back.
Yeah,
And so I think what I said was, I want a one piece upper, like the Giro Empire, just so that they knew what I was talking about, because the Giro Empire is a one piece upper. And they were like, okay, we can do that. And then they sent me the samples of these lasted shoes without soles on them. They were exact copies of Giro Empires, like exact copies down to the exact pattern of the cooling holes and everything. And I was like, you're going to get me in a lot of trouble if I try to sell
yeah.
these things. Like I didn't mean copy the Giro Empire. But you say something like that to these factories that
Yep, we'll do it.
they're like, yep, that's it. Like that those were our instructions, and that is what we were going to do. Like they will do exactly what you tell them. Mistakes and everything, anything that comes back is probably your fault. But
Yeah. So I'm curious with your first purchase order when you kind of put your money where your mouth is. You're making this order. Tell me about how many you decided to go with. How did you finance it, and did you sleep for a while
yeah,
afterwards?
yeah. So at first, I my plan was, I was talking to the the factory, and I was like, I want to make 500 pairs at a time and like refill as necessary. And they were like, yeah, I think we can do that. And then as we got into it, some of the suppliers had minimum order quantities that were higher than that. And
Yeah.
so, and it was particularly for the carbon soles, the minimum order quantities got pretty high.
Pretty big.
And so we had to go with the highest minimum order quantity of the various suppliers. And so that ended up being 1,500 pairs.
How many POs have you cut since then, if you're allowed to share this information?
Oh, we're still on the first container load of shoes of 1,500.
Nice. When did you get those? When did they hit your door?
Like mid-May.
Okay, so just like not too long ago.
Yeah.
How many have you sold through, if I may ask?
I think we're on like 300, something like that.
Okay, nice. And I've seen that you've started to get more of the professional field wearing some of your stuff. I imagine age groups. So, like, what's been your strategy and how has it been going in terms of getting product out the door and under the right circumstances for more eyes to see it and things like that?
Yeah, it's like marketing of consumer products is something I have never done before. I've
Mm-hmm.
never been a social media guy before. And so I've been experimenting with a lot of different stuff to see what works. Um, I think that like what really got me my initial boost at the beginning was I had sort of shared my whole process of generating the idea and developing it, and every step I went through, I shared on this thread on Slow Twitch. And so
Nice.
I think over that period of time, I got a lot of people that were like ready to go um, as soon as the shoe was released. And then, and so that was sort of my initial batch of customers. And then I think after that, there was another batch that had sort of been following along the process, but were like, I want to wait until these initial people who are using them come back and like give some
Give some
sort of
feedback.
experience and say, hey, did you enjoy using the shoe? Did it work for you? You know, what was the good? What was the bad? And so then I think um, that, you know, those people started buying when you know they would ask their friend, hey, I know you got those, like how did those things work for you at
Yeah.
you know Oceanside or wherever, you know.
Yeah.
And so those people started buying. I think that you know Instagram has been relatively effective in certain circumstances. I've been sort of learning a little bit more about um, how to craft a message that resonates with people,
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
and what people are looking for and what they're not. It's been a lot of just trial and error,
Yeah.
of you know of making something, and sometimes it's really surprising. Um, you know, I'll work really hard on this idea that I have, and it'll be scripted out, and I'll film everything really carefully and edit everything really carefully and carefully pick the perfect music and put this thing up there, and nobody cares. Like
Yeah.
nobody looks at it, nobody likes it, nobody comments on it. And then I'll be out riding with some friends, and I'll just take my phone out and I'll like take a little video and then be like upload, and like it
Yeah.
blows up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? Why was that so interesting?
Oh, the
Whereas
algorithm.
this other thing that I worked so hard on was so not interesting.
Yeah. You sound
Um,
like a filmmaker.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's been, I've learned a lot about that. And I think maybe I'm starting to get to the point where I can do something that people like on purpose,
Yeah.
rather than just by accident.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah. So are you accounting, research and development, social media
Oh yeah.
marketing? You're it right now, right?
I'm basically the only employee. I do
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if there's anybody out there who would be interested in helping you, is there any way that they could do so?
Maybe. Right now I'm, you know, not making enough money to really pay anybody anything that is worthwhile.
Sure.
But hopefully soon that will change. You know, I think that, you know, operations wise with like order fulfillment and and that kind of thing will be an area of help that needs to be filled first, and then probably social media also.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much time it takes to do a good job on that. Lately I've been falling short a lot on that, trying to handle other stuff. So
Yeah.
those are probably the two things that I'll need help with first.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll make sure to try to share as many clips from this episode as possible, and I'll make sure to link all your stuff. What are the prices of the shoes, if I may ask?
They are $405. We typically have a 10% discount code available for people that want to sign up for our mailing list, which brings it down to 360 something.
Okay, sweet. So tell me a little bit about the ups and the downs, because like you said, this has changed your world in terms of how you manage stress and what's stressful. So what's that journey been like so far, the past year?
Yeah, well, if you just mean since the shoes were released, by far the biggest stressor was that wire issue that I talked about. Because I thought that I was going to be able to set this whole thing up to where it would be almost all automatic and super easy to run. And so I had a third-party fulfillment warehouse where all the shoes went to initially, and everything was like integrated. So if somebody went to my website, they would buy the shoes, the payment was processed automatically, the order automatically goes to this warehouse where they automatically pack it up and send it off, and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah. That's expensive.
And very quickly, we had a lot of sales the first couple of days because of all those people who were waiting. And then almost immediately, I'm getting messages like, hey, I just took the shoe out of the box and put it on my foot, and the first time I closed it, the wires broke. And like the first message I got from that, I was like, huh, it's really weird. Yeah, we'll get you a new pair of shoes. And then like I got another message, and I'm like, oh God,
this is a problem.
There's two of them. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Because not only do I now have a bunch of shoes out there with these defective wires, but I have a whole warehouse full of them, several states away that I don't have access to. And they're not going to swap the wires out. So what in the world am I going to do to solve this problem? And it was a nightmare. I wasn't sleeping at all. I had to get somebody to manufacture, it's 1,500 pairs of shoes, 4 wires per pair. So I had to get somebody to manufacture 6,000 wires like overnight at the right specification. And then I had to get them all swapped out, and that doesn't happen overnight. It's not possible. So I wanted it to be done overnight, but it's not possible. So I started making wires by hand in my basement to cover as many of the people that already had shoes in their hands as I could before the manufactured wires come in. So I'm like every morning madly like cutting and marking and crimping and heat shrinking like hundreds of wires and mailing them out to everybody who already had shoes with instructions and links to videos and all this kind of stuff. And then and people seemed really appreciative of the effort, and
they're forgiving.
And they were like, wow, it sucked that my wires broke, but you really fixed it really quickly. This is great customer service. Thanks a lot. Or hey, I didn't even know there was a problem with the wires, and all of a sudden I get this envelope with wires and instructions, and wow, that was great that you were so proactive. And I think in a sort of a perverse way, it
helped.
It gave us a reputation for having good customer service. But I was losing it. I was just, if you looked at me, my hair was all greasy and up, and I hadn't shaved in a week, and my bags under my eyes, just like crimping wires and mailing and emailing, it was horrible. So that was probably definitely by far the most stressful episode that we've
Yeah.
had.
That's a beautiful founder story. I don't know if you've ever heard of the podcast, How I Built This. Have you ever heard of
Oh
that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's literally like every episode. Somebody's got that story. It's like, oh yeah, I got this. It happened to me with the hammock stuff. The TRX strap guy crumpling the handles. Like, yeah, it's just that's a beautiful
Yeah,
story. And
yeah.
like, hopefully you can write that in your book someday, because I hope you do write a book. It's going to be an interesting one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So, what is your ultimate goal with VeloVeta, or are you even able to think that far ahead?
I have been thinking about that some, and I don't know what the actual answer is going to be, but I think the idea that I favor right now is um, just making really good technical footwear in a few different sports that help people get out and engage in their passions as best they can. And so, we're going to fill out, a little bit more cycling stuff with some more road shoes and some mountain biking shoes and that kind of thing. And then where we go next, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about ski boots, mostly because I love skiing, and it would be fun to be involved. I think that we'll move into a few different areas of highly technical footwear for activities that people just love to do.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds super interesting. I'm looking forward to see what the next ones are. I actually really do want to buy a pair now. So I'm going to talk to my wife. We'll see what happens.
All right.
So what makes you like the most happy in life? Like, what is the most fulfilling part of life for you?
Oh, uh, I I think it has to do with a combination of participating in these activities that I really love to do, but doing it with people that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more I realize that almost everything meaningful in life has to do with your personal relationships.
Mm,
And so, uh, man, just going on a hike with my wife and our dogs somewhere beautiful is hard to beat.
yeah.
Um, in terms of if you're just joy and
Yeah.
happiness, that's hard to beat.
Yeah. And I suspected you would mention that, so I'm glad you did ask, because the next question I was going to ask is, um, being an entrepreneur is usually has like tremendous strain on relationships. I know personally, and then if you look at the statistics, like entrepreneurs typically end up getting divorced, and that's a horrible thing. I don't think it has to be that way, but how has that affected your relationship with you and your wife, and like how do you combat and navigate that?
Um, she's super supportive, uh, and I think where it comes in is, I think relationships, really good long-term relationships, you need to put time into it and keep that emotional connection. And that doesn't just happen by accident. And so, um, when there are periods of time, if I'm really stressed and focused on the business and
Mm-hmm.
traveling and whatever, and not thinking about, um, our relationship or that uh, maintaining that connection, sometimes you spend some time living in the same house but not interacting,
Yeah.
and it can cause you to feel almost more like roommates than husband and wife. Like
Yeah.
you're occupying the same space, you're cooking or whatever, but you're not focused on each other. You're focused on whatever. And I think that is probably the biggest strain. And I think that it's important to, I mean, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have times where you have to buckle down and be selfish about putting your time into your business. But I think that you need to recognize that is if you're married, doing that is neglecting
Yeah.
your spouse. And so you need to make sure that is temporary. And that your spouse knows that it's temporary and why you're doing it, and knows that that you're creating, you know, this potentially problematic situation and that it's not going to last forever. And then you make sure that it doesn't last forever, and you pull back and you make sure that you reconnect and become a couple again, and
Yeah.
don't let your entire life descend into obsession over the business.
Yeah. 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 Good advice. That's a great clip too. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, it's relationships. I was thinking as you were saying that, I was thinking, really you could almost tie this into how you would run a business or any spouse relationship or whatnot. Like it really is important. I feel like relationships are so easily walked over because, especially in American culture, I know for me, growing up, work was always valued super highly, and then it's like, yeah, I gotta work, gotta work, gotta work, gotta work. But if you don't have that supportive relationship, like it almost makes it not worth it, because at the end of the night, when I lay in bed, if I don't have my wife beside me or I don't have my friends around me to like help me through hard times, like what good is that stuff? Not
Yeah.
super good.
I mean, the older I get, the more I know, like, it's about personal relationships, and it's about feeling you've accomplished something that is good, however you
Yeah.
define that. And that is not necessarily like we love to define that as making money, right? Like if you've
Yeah.
done well, you've made money. But the more I learn about myself, the more I learn about like what makes me feel satisfied is not necessarily what makes money. There are a
Yeah.
lot of things that I do that make me feel fulfilled that have nothing to do with making money.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. A couple other questions, and let you go because I know you got a race to go to.
yeah,
Um, First question: are you religious?
no,
No. Do you
no.
hold any? Yeah, go for it. You're gonna say something.
Well, so my mom is Jewish. My dad was Episcopalian, and I grew up mostly attending an Episcopalian church, and sometimes going to services at the synagogue or whatever. And um, I don't know, nothing ever really stuck with me.
Sure. And can I push back a little bit, because I observe in some of your values, some of those, and we don't have to pin them to any specific religion, but like moral context, contextual values, where like you're realizing, oh, these straps are messed up and somebody might mess something up or whatever. I don't know. I'm sure you had a million lists of fears, but
Yeah.
it seems like that those like connection, quality of product and time, like those are pretty deep moral values that I would assume came from some of that upbringing, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I have an inherent sense of right and wrong, and I feel like I have a strong sense of whatever my moral code is. And I really try hard to live up to that. And if I don't, I feel really bad about it. And I know a lot of people really feel that they get that from religion, and that informs them on what that moral code is. Maybe I was influenced by that when I was a kid, or maybe not. I don't know. My perception of it is that I just have some sort of inherent sense of my own personal moral code, and maybe I'm missing the source of that.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know what the source is. I
Yeah.
have a strong moral code that I believe in and that I take seriously. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, if you ever figured out, I'd be curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So last question, and it has to do with VeloVeta, and it may be a stupid question, but what would you sell it all for right now? You're not allowed to use it anymore. You're done. You wash your hands of this part of it.
Like what number?
Yeah. What number?
Oh
Or is there a
God,
number?
I'm sure there is a number. I would
One.
be, no matter what the number is, I would be disappointed because I have sort of like goals and visions that I'd like to see if we can achieve.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a number that I would accept that I'd be like, wow, like I'd be dumb to turn that down. Um, but I don't want to
Yeah.
do that yet. Or maybe I don't want to do it ever. I don't know. And I have no idea what that number would be. I haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have a ready answer
No,
for
it's
you.
good. I feel like if I offered you $1 billion, you'd consider it pretty
I would,
heavily.
yeah. So 100% I would accept that number. Yeah, the actual number is quite a bit lower than that, but I don't know what the actual
Yeah.
number is.
Everybody's got a number. Well, I would say don't sell it. It seems I'm excited to have found you at this level or got to know you at this level of the stage of the company because you seem like the type who's going to continue to weather the storms and make something happen unless some force of God stops it all from happening. So I look forward to seeing how it continues to grow, and hopefully we get more people on the circuit wearing these shoes. And yeah, if you do ski boots, snowboarding boots, specialty hiking, running shoes, let me know. We'll definitely love to hear about it.
All that is possible.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for jumping on, Ed. It was a great pleasure. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and thank you so much to Ed for coming on and sharing a bit of his story, where he's been and where he's going. Super excited for VeloVeta and everything he's doing. It'll be neat to see how they succeed because I have a high confidence that they're going to be very successful. And also, if you made it to this point in the episode, just want to say thank you so much. It means a lot that you listen this far all the way through. If you're on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe. Give a comment. That really helps us to grow. Ring that notification bell. We release an episode every week and have shorts going out. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or any of those others, please like and review the podcast or whatever is allowed on that platform. If you're on Spotify, you can follow us as well. And you can even submit questions there. So if you have specific questions you'd like to have answered or asked, please write in there. You can also message me on Instagram through Podcast Stupid Questions or Seth_T_Hill for my personal Instagram. Last thing, on the website, stupidquestions.show, if you want to sign up for a newsletter, you can do so by going to stupidquestions.show, scrolling down. There's a place where you can subscribe there. You can also reach out and contact and ask us questions there if you wanted to. All right. Thank you guys so much. This is like episode 30 plus now. I'm not even sure which one. I think 31. But yeah, just so fun to be on this journey with you guys. If you think something could be better, let me know. All right. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thank you so much to Precision Fuel and Hydration for sponsoring today's episode. Amazing company that makes amazing products. I have been testing out anything from their chews, which are my favorite, or their carb-only mix, or different kinds of carb mixes that include the different levels of sodium that you may need to keep your electrolytes in balance. Check them out. You can go to pfandh.com/stupid questions, and you can get 15% off any of their stuff there. They also have an amazing tool that gives athletes a personalized plan for their next race, which provides a lot of great basis for you to iterate and refine your strategy come race day. You can make yours at precisionhydration.com/planner. That's /planner. And yeah, so if you want to get an awesome discount with some awesome products, make sure to check it out. That's at pfandh.com/stupid questions. You can also find this stuff in the show notes.